Now, I love modifying vehicles just as much as the next guy. This whole channel was built on that concept, actually, so it shouldn't be any surprise to you. But did you know that there are some modifications that have detrimental unintended consequences? In fact, some modifications that people make very commonly, very popular modifications, could actually be catastrophic. Okay, catastrophic might be a little bit of a strong descriptive word, but the reality is that there are some very popular, very common upgrades that are made to performance type vehicles, particularly the C6 Corvette, that actually do have catastrophic consequences. I use that phrase again. That can be detrimental if you're not careful. Let's say that. One is wheels. Number one on the list is wheels, and these are coming in no particular order. I love changing out wheels on vehicles. I changed the wheels on almost literally every single vehicle that I've ever worked on. Some people hate me saying it, but I'm not a fan of the factory wheels that come on the C6. I don't mind the chromies on this one. These in particular are actually in really good shape still, and they do go with the black car quite nicely. Okay, I don't hate them, right? But we still want to change them out. But the problem is people choose wheels. They're not wise with their decisions. To be fair, there's not a lot of choices in terms of aftermarket off-the-shelf wheels for the Corvette because of the weird bolt pattern and the fact that it can't take low offset wheels because of how the fenders and the quarter panels are, but that's neither here nor there. The problem is that people automatically are tempted to go with larger diameter and wider widths, right? So they go from a 19 in the rear and an 18 up front to a 20 in the rear and a 19 up front. And that in and of itself isn't the issue necessarily. The problem is that people are selecting wheels that are substantially heavier than what's on the car from the factory. And now you've added an inch in diameter and an inch in width in a lot of cases. You're adding way more weight. And then what does that require? Wider, bigger, heavier tires. So you're adding substantial amounts of weight to each corner of your car, and that's unsprung weight. Now, this is another topic of conversation we can get into at a different date. In fact, I think I've talked about it in previous videos many years ago. But unsprung weight is weight that is not held up by the springs. It is just dead, heavy rotating mass that has been added to each corner of your car. That hurts fuel mileage. It hurts handling capabilities. It hurts braking capabilities. It hurts acceleration. This is a C6 Corvette. The whole idea of it is to be a good handling, good stopping, fast accelerating car. And now you've just killed it by adding the wrong wheels. So pay attention. Make sure you understand what you're doing. Sure, upsize your wheels. Put a 20 on the rear and a 19 up front. Yes, get a wider tire. But make sure you're getting a wheel that is lighter or no heavier than the factory setup. I see some nice looking wheels out there, but they're cast. They're from these, Chinese brands, and they weigh 35 freaking pounds. That's too much. It's getting too heavy, okay? So just pay attention to wheels you're putting on your Corvette, for crying out loud. Now, another very, very common upgrade that is made to a Corvette, C5, C6, they're all the same. This is one that everybody loves to go to, and that's cold air intake and headers, and no tune. You need to tune the vehicle with headers. I can't tell you how many videos I see online where some kid picks up their C6 Corvette from the shop. They just had headers installed, and they get out on the interstate and they're doing rollers, they're doing pulls, and they're just banging off limiter because the car sounds fantastic, and it does. But if the car is not tuned to accommodate the additional airflow in and the additional airflow out, that can be very detrimental to not only performance, but to the car's health. I'm nowhere near a purist, so don't come at me that way. I'm all for adding an intake and headers and cam and doing all that. Let's pull power out of the vehicle, right? I'm all about that. But there are so many people across platforms that will install a cold air intake and think they're getting additional power. You're not. And they install headers and think you're getting additional power without doing a tune, and you're not. But not only that, you are running the risk of running lean, having too much air moving through the system and not enough fuel to accommodate. The computer in the car might try to balance things out and keep it running healthily, but you might get a check engine light. You might get surging while you're cruising down the interstate. You potentially could get misfires, but you could run lean, which causes the car to run hot, which can cause damage to the engine. So why would you do that? Another very common upgrade that people make to their Corvettes is Aero. Yes, it's mostly aesthetic in 99% of the cases out there. It's just purely for looks, and that's okay. I'm all about it. I like a good looking spoiler. I like some nice side skirts. If anybody has a good source for a nice front splitter, a chin spoiler, front splitter, whatever you call it for the Corvette, let me know in the comments, because I'm on a hunt for one, and I haven't come across any that I actually like how they look on the C6 base. So let me know in the comments if you have a good source for a front splitter for a base model C6. Now, adding Aero to your C6 seems innocent enough, and it probably is, but little do you know, maybe you do, that the whole point of Aero in the first place is to create drag and create downforce, help maintain traction and grip as the car is speeding down the road or around the track. But that can hinder performance as far as 0 to 60 time. It can hinder gas mileage. It can actually hinder how the car handles. Now, most people aren't being super dramatic and hanging a bunch of crap off their cars, but the wrong elements can actually have negative side effects. Now, I haven't timed a 0 to 60 in this C6 Corvette yet, but I did do it in my Infiniti Q50 a number of years ago using Draggy and adding a high kick duckbill spoiler off the trunk, which I loved, and the car needed it in terms of aesthetics. It made it look so much better. But I actually lost like 1/10 of a second in my 0 to 60 runs. And 1/10 of a second in 0 to 60 is pretty substantial, especially in a car that, it is really struggling to reduce at 0 to 60 times. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case for a C6, but just, conceptually, technically, if you think about it, the purpose of a spoiler, again, is to create downforce, and downforce creates additional resistance and friction, and therefore it would theoretically slow you down potentially. So think about that. Definitely have to take into consideration what you're trying to get out of the car in terms of performance. If you're just trying to make it look a little bit cooler and you don't give a crap about how it performs, in an 1/8 mile or a 1/4 mile or 0 to 60, by all means, hang a bunch of splitters and spoilers off the thing. But if you do care, think about that a little bit first. And finally, the upgrade that can actually cause some serious damage to your C6 Corvette is something that is very popular, and it's an upgrade that people make regularly, and that is tires. It seems very basic, and I don't know what the deal is, but people love to put the widest, fattest tire that they possibly can on these cars.
Seems right to me.
More often than not, it doesn't actually need it. I don't know what all the tire options are for the base model C6. I have the Z51 package. I'm not sure if that matters actually, but it has a 285 on the rear. That's a lot of tire. And it is the factory Goodyear Eagle F1, and it's a decent tire. They're not super, super grippy from what I've experienced in the short time of driving this car. It seems to handle quite well. It's a 245 in the front. It's a little bit narrow for my preference, but the way the car sits, it actually handles quite well the way it is. But everybody wants to go with a 305 or a 315, or they end up putting a 12-inch wide wheel in the back, and they're doing like a 325 or a 345, and then like a 285 up front. Unless you are making a ton of power, that is absolutely not necessary. The car handles pretty well. It puts power down pretty well. They're pretty balanced cars. It's a Corvette, for crying out loud. But you really have to take into consideration, if you put on a Nitto R888 or even Michelin PS4S's in a 315, for crying out loud, on the rear end of this thing, or a drag slick, which a lot of people are doing, putting drag packs on these things. I like to be like right at the edge of grip. I want to know if I launch the car that it's going to spin, but it'll hook pretty quickly. The idea of like being on a prepped surface and dumping the clutch on this thing, it scares the hell out of me, because you're going to break some stuff. I'm sure there are a ton of guys out there that'll comment and say, I've done a million passes on prep surfaces with wider tires on the stock trans and the stock rear diff and the factory clutch. That's great. Awesome. and that speaks volumes to the quality of the vehicle. But to me, that's a little bit worrisome. The fact is that if you are still in the stock clutch, these are 20-year-old cars. If you're still in the stock transmission, it's a 20-year-old car. Stock rear diff, 20-year-old car. That makes a lot of torque, actually, for what it is. And if you put a big, wide, sticky tire on the rear end of this thing, you're gonna burn the clutch up. I wouldn't be surprised if you do even a hard, you kind of roll into it from 20 mile an hour or something in first gear. I wouldn't be surprised if you start smelling the clutch get a little bit hot, honestly. And if you're hooking, it's putting a lot of additional strain on the trans in the rear diff. So tires, I think, is one that just people don't think about. They're like, I got this badass Corvette. I'm making good power, even if it's stock. I need a big, fat, sticky tire on the rear end. Maybe just going at it from a looks perspective, but they can't help but drive the car hard. So an unintended consequence is having the clutch burned up, breaking a rear diff, messing up the trans. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. And that is kind of the nature of the business, right? It's the nature of the beast. If you start upgrading cars, inevitably something down the line, there's going to be a weak point. Rubber. So this isn't news. And, if somebody's always got something smart to say, like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. It's just the nature of the game, right? If you've been around a long time, this is no news to you. If you're a younger person or you're just sort of getting into performance vehicles and thinking about some modifications that you want to make to your Corvette, just take all of these things into consideration. That anytime you make an upgrade, something related to that particular upgrade might end up becoming a weak point. If you put big fat sticky tires on it, you're putting a lot of strain on the rear diff, on the transmission, on the clutch. If you install headers and an intake, the car isn't meant to breathe in that much and exhale that much. So you need to tune it to make sure you can accommodate those parts. Aero creates drag, downforce, could potentially slow you down, right? Wheels are very important upgrade. They can make a big difference in how the car looks and how the car handles, but you can get a negative side effect too if you're putting big ass, gaudy, fat, heavy wheels on each of the corners of your Corvette. It could have detrimental side effects in handling, stopping, fuel mileage, and acceleration, among other things. So, a little bit to think about. Let me know in the comments below if you know of any modifications that actually can hurt the car or break the car, worst case scenario. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. Appreciate you guys watching very much. A lot more stuff coming for the channel, not just some of these lists. I got a lot of parts that need to be installed. Speaking of upgrades, we're doing some installations, doing some testing, doing some driving, so I'm really looking forward to it. Stick around. Appreciate it, guys. Subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next one.